You're listening to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast, the show with a light-hearted look at the eventing world, all of the big event previews, reviews, and special guests, and of course, backed up with all of the key Echo Rating stats. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. And this is a very special episode for you listeners because we have two incredible guests joining Sam, Diarm and myself. I'm going to start by saying a very happy new year to Sam Watson. Big year 2020.
Yeah, it's a big year coming up. Thank you, Nicole. We're doing something we've never done before, which is that we have 5 people on the show, but we haven't quite on a Christmas theme got the 3 wise men, but we definitely have 2 wise men on the show. So yeah, looking forward to it.
I'm not going to ask you to name those 2 wise men just yet, because Diarm will no doubt jump in and put himself forward.
Yeah, he'll be vouching that he's the 3rd, but we'll see.
Yeah, I've actually taken quite a lot of abuse pre-call and in the intro to this, which I'm in no way surprised at, I suppose.
Start 2020 as we mean to go on, D.
Exactly. Yes, happy to be here, Nicole, and looking forward to a good show.
Well, I have to admit, these 2 guests, I think we've outdone ourselves to start 2020, to be honest. So this episode, listeners, is really about the International Eventing Forum, which takes place at Hartpury in a few weeks' time. And we will have a special competition running for all of you lovely listeners very shortly as well to win 2 tickets for it. But the 2 guests are 2 men who are heavily involved in it. The first, I'm going to welcome one of the directors, Smiley, who is an absolute legend of the sport. 2 European Championships, 3 World Games, 2 Olympics, and he is a fellow of the British Horse Society, one of only a handful of people in the whole world. Eric, welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast.
Thank you. I'm really, really pleased to start the new year with chatting with friends.
We are very much looking forward to it. And we are joined by a man who will be one of the guest speakers at this year's forum, who I have to admit, I'm going to try not to be a fangirl because he is one of the biggest names in the sport of eventing, none other than Andrew Nicholson. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year to you all, and it's a pleasure to be on this.
Now, Sam has already marked you up as the 2 wise men, and I have to admit, we're going to have a really interesting conversation on this show because it is all about horsemanship, which is the theme for this year's forum. But Eric, before we start, just tell us what it is, because it's been going a few years now, and it's been hugely, hugely successful, the International Eventing Forum.
Yes, it's one of those things that started with a bit of a mindset of 3-4 Northern Ireland people who have worked together for many, many years. Jean Mitchell, Karen McEwen was our first secretary. Dora Beacon was now taken over. Sue and I, and we felt there was a need to present something called what I would call good practice, and to try and highlight things that are of interest within our sport, maybe topical subjects or areas that we feel there is a need to highlight, and things that I think are relevant to the sport that we should make people aware of. And the day's forum is designed to present good practice, stimulate a bit of thought process. And it's been going now for about 15 years. And I've been the sort of technical director of it for that time, ably assisted by Sue, who keeps me on the straight and narrow. That's my wife. And Jean Mitchell, who provides an amazing thought process around the day-to-day running of the forum. And then a lot of the detail helped with our secretary, Dora Beacon. So that's how it sort of started. And it has, as you say, it's grown. Each year it sort of gets a little bit more diverse, I think. But we try and get good people and make it interesting for everyone to come and listen to.
And each year there is a theme. This year the theme is horsemanship. Andrew, just sum up what that word means when you hear it. What does horsemanship mean to you?
Well, first of all, just to stray off a bit, I'm very interested in my chat with you all tonight. So I've got some idea of what I'm meant to be doing there, because I haven't really given it a lot of thought. And now that I'm all chatting to you, it's put me under a little bit of pressure. Okay, so I've got the horsemanship, but you've just told me that. So if I can tell you, for me, horsemanship, I presume I'm talking about in eventing. It's the basics, the understanding of your horse. It's got 4 legs, ears, and a tail. You know, it's not rocket science riding a horse. And you have to treat it like a horse. That's, to me, the thing about the horsemanship.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic. When I heard the topic, the first thing I thought was, well, you know, what do you expect? You know, what are people going to talk about? Because it covers an awful lot. The first 3 words I put down was, firstly, it's the skill of the rider as an athlete, but then it's also in the training as well. Because I think what is great and one of the unique things about horse sport, aside from the fact that we work with an animal, is that we're an athlete and we're a coach. We are a trainer. We're training the horses as well. So I had the skill of us as riders. I have the training side of it as well. And then the other one, which is really relevant, and I know that Robert Power is going to be there from racing, but it's relevant in all horse sports as well, is the sort of the welfare side of it. That while we put our bodies on the line, we're also pushing the, elite sport is about athletes, pushing the boundaries, pushing the limits. But we're the ones that have to be responsible for knowing where the line is with a horse, to go and win badminton, which is the skill part, or to go and win the Gold Cup in racing. There's huge skill involved in that, a huge amount of training, but we also have that huge responsibility to be so aware and in tune of where the line is as well, that we don't go beyond it. So it's covering, for me, it's just covering such a vast kind of subject there. And so it's the good news for you, Andrew, is I think you could probably pick on any of those areas and work on them. But that was my interpretation.
I agree, Sam. It is vast, but if you look at it from a very simple way, it is pretty basic in the way that the horse is a horse. You're training it. You've got to give it the respect it deserves as a horse, and use your common sense in what you've done in your training to what you can achieve. And I could be very wrong, but I think Robbie Powell would, he hops on his horses at the races and has the counter down to the start to assess whether he goes with it or behind it or whatever he has to a fence. And, they're making that decision very quickly. And that's what I'm meaning about a horse is a horse. The majority of horses think the same. And it's getting into their system, respecting them, and being able to work with them.
Would you say it's like one of our most important assets of a rider? If you were sitting down with a golfer or a tennis player or a footballer, and you start talking about the skills that they're going to need to make it in this game, is this the key skill that you sit down with a young person who wants to make it in an equestrian sport?
I think so. I feel very strongly that it's very much, your horse is a living thing. It's got its own mind. You have to be able to get into its mind, get its trust, and give it the respect it deserves. And we're lucky in the eventing job, we can give them the hours of training.
Do you think, Andrew, horsemanship is something that you are born with naturally and then can sort of enhance and improve over time? Or do you think it is something that you can learn from scratch?
Naturally, I would say you can learn it all. But now that I've gotten a little older and just work with more riders, I start to feel that perhaps you can't learn it all. perhaps it is more of a feel you have with the horse. I could be very wrong with that, but for sure in my earlier days, I thought you could learn everything you needed to know. But the older I've gotten, the more I work with other riders, I'm now thinking it's something you either have or you don't.
And I suppose one interesting one for Eric really as a trainer, and I suppose with the forum in mind a little bit as well, is do you think that this has been a constant in the sport, that horsemanship is the same now, or should be the same now as it was 20, 30 years ago? Or, does it change as the sport changes? Does that change? Or
I think the basic horsemanship hasn't changed.
Agreed. Yeah.
What has changed is the amount of training we all do now with a horse. You can train a horse to do all sorts of things, and you can train them to do them very, very well. But then to do them in competition is a very different thing. Very, very different. And that, to me, is what shows up the ones who perhaps don't have the understanding what I'm talking about, that it's a horse at the end of the day. You have to be able to work on that feel, that instinct, think like it does. You've done your training, but in a competition is quite different.
Okay, if I could sort of nip in with that, there's so much that's really interesting, and we may well go over the 40 minutes or the 4 hours on this one, but it's an interesting subject. You bring it up, Andrew. One of the reasons that I picked the subject this year of horsemanship was because I tend to choose titles for the forum that, as I travel the world coaching and teaching people of all levels, I try and pick subjects that I think are relevant to what's happening today and relevant to what's happening within our sport today. And when I watch competition for the last sort of 18 months, I started to sort of think of titles for this year. One of the things that I see is people being overtaught and failing in competition because they lack that natural instinct to make things happen at that moment, because they're overtaught, overprogrammed, overprepared. So I then started to think a little bit more about that. And I thought about it and wrote about it an awful lot when I was writing the book, Two Brains, One Aim. And I then started to look into education as a big subject with schools and the education process. And I came across many articles that said our education system in schools is flawed because teachers are stuck to curriculum and exams, and they don't allow pupils as much opportunity to experience, to ask questions, to be curious, to be interested, to find out for themselves about the subject. Now, when you relate that to horses and our sport, I think Andrew's right. Most of the time, if you allow people to learn and you facilitate their learning, that learning process of how they learn themselves will stand them in good stead much more in competition than if they're taught what to do in too regimented a way. It's exactly the same with horses. I'm highly critical of our sport for teaching horses to be too dominated, overbitted, so as they're too controlled, too orderly. Horses need some initiative themselves. Horses need some freedom of thought, because two minds going cross country are an awful lot more productive than just the rider. we need horses that think. And part of that thinking process is allowing them to learn instinctively what to do, allowing riders to learn instinctively what to do. And for me, that's all part of horsemanship. And horsemanship is, I think, the riders 30, 40, 50 years ago were just as much horsemen, but as Andrew says, nowadays, they're more trained, the standards are higher, but horsemen of 30, 40 years ago would compete very well today because they understand the horse and they understand that relationship of working in harmony with the horse, not in domination of the horse. And so I think there's a much bigger subject. It's the education of how people learn. As a coach, as a trainer, I'm very involved in trying to facilitate their learning. At the same time, facilitate the horses. The partnership is able to go cross-country, which is the nub of our sport, much better. Dressage show jumping, that's fine. You can you can be fairly sort of formal about that in many ways. But it's the cross-country phase that initiative, that sort of spark, that degree of feel and horsemanship of allowing things to happen. That's what makes our sport and defines our sport. So that was what made me choose this particular topic. And it's also what made me go to Andrew to try and bring him into it. Because I remember many, many years ago, you probably forget this, Andrew, that I was competing somewhere and I had to rush over to another class. And I didn't have time to walk a show jumping course. And I said to Andrew, how many strides is from there to there? And he looked at me and said, I don't know. I just jumped that fence and jumped that fence, which I think he still does today in that sort of way. But he makes it look as if he does know what he's doing.
Now I do a lot of training, so now I know it's 5 or it's
now. Oh, so things have changed, Andrew.
Only in my talking.
Ah. So that's what prompted the whole topic of horsemanship.
Well, I think it's fascinating that we're, there's a lot of I think a word that's coming in there is understanding as well. But one of the things that I tweaked a little bit as I'm sort of I'm learning to coach more. It's something I'm doing a lot more of. And I found myself, I changed one word in my language over the last year. I used to say to a horse, or say to someone that I was teaching, you need to make your horse, collect a little bit more, or you need to make the horse a little bit round, or you need to do this. And I've now banned the word make because it's been interpreted as force. And I now, when I'm teaching people, I say you need to teach your horse to move away from your right leg if you're doing a leg yield, or you need to teach your horse to find roundness and how that works. And then it completely, because the first time when I started doing it, the people I were training sort of looked at me going, "What I need to teach the horse? I thought you were trying to teach me here." And I think that, it makes the point a little bit like where Andrew started, is that you can't, if you expect a horse, if you expect to be able to make a horse to do something, you're now thinking that this is a machine, that if you press this button, then this happens. And the whole point is that you have to start thinking, okay, this is the outcome that we want to achieve. How do I teach the horse to achieve that? And then it makes me think of some of the greatest pieces of horsemanship that I've seen. One of them that stands out, I was actually watching this race with Diarm because we knew the horse for various reasons. But Paul Carberry, who's one of the great Irish jockeys, now retired, he was riding a horse that's actually owned by Zara Tyndall's husband, Mike Tyndall, called Monbeg Dude in the Welsh National. And the horse literally fell out the back of the telly. He was not enjoying the race at all, didn't seem to be enjoying the race. And Paul was sitting still. It's a 3.5 mile race on heavy ground. And he got up to win eventually from looking like he was going to pull up. But he was someone who listened to the horse, knew that if I try and make this horse be in touch and be in what would be the ideal, in inverted commas, ideal position at this point in the race, it's not going to work. his intuition, his feel, his horsemanship was telling him, I know this horse, we've got to go with him now, and I'll ask him for his effort in a few minutes' time when hopefully he's changed his mind a little bit.
And Sam, just to interject there, you're saying exactly what we're trying to sort of put across with this, that you can't teach those things. You sort of learn them, and you learn them by feeling and understanding, as Andrew says, understanding the horse. They're as individual as we are. And if we misinterpret our horses, then we do so at our peril, because we need to know that they have a thought process that 99% of the time is trying to help us and trying to be a positive partner. And if we sort of damage that or interfere with that, then they don't realize their potential, nor do we as a partnership.
Can I just say on both Sam and Eric's comments there, actually, it leads me back to one word that I noticed Andrew said a few times a few minutes ago, and that would be respect, because actually you're respecting the horse and everything that they are learning instinctively, that they have to enjoy the job, that you can't make them do something, that they are ultimately part of it with you. You're not forcing them. It is that feel, it is that natural instinct. And yes, you can learn it, but it is respect at the end of the day. Andrew, I think that came across pretty clearly there for me.
Yeah, and if you get to the big top of the range events, the big cross country courses, for sure there might be somewhere in the course you give the horse a little tap with the stick. You're not trying to direct pain to it, because if you've got to give it pain at that level, you're not going to get round. All you're doing is telling it, come on, wake up, it's a serious questions coming up. It's a communication bit with it. If people who don't ride horses at the big level, if they think they go to the big cross-country courses and are bullied around them, they're very, very wrong. You have to be on the wavelength with the horse. For sure, you might ride it a bit stronger sometimes, but it's not bullying it. It's only preparing it for what's coming. And that's where the training bit comes into work.
Just listening to everyone, I think one of the interesting pieces, just Andrew, when you mentioned at the top level, and Eric, I think it's fascinating when you're talking about the much wider piece of education, how education is changing, how the way in which we're learning is changing. I wonder, is the way in which the sport is set up now influencing the horsemanship conversation in any way at the lower levels of the sport and the more participatory levels of the sport, where a huge number of our British eventing or USEA or Eventing Ireland members will be competing, 75% in that kind of area, competing exclusively at the, 90s, 100s, 110 type area. At that level, is the horse asked, or is it as important that the horse is thinking for themselves compared to what is required when you get to the top level? At that level, we see the massive influence of dressage, and dressage, I suppose, being probably the area in eventing of the three phases where obedience and training is slightly different to the natural instincts which are required. Andrew, as you talk about, top level cross country and that being one.
Can I go first on this one?
Yeah, you go first and I'll follow you.
Okay. It's going back earlier, Eric was talking about education of children. Okay, I've never had a cross-country lesson in all my career. I've had to learn from mistakes, and it's not a good way to learn. But I still have my way of training them at home, and I make mistakes. And I think it's very, very important for the young horses to make mistakes.
Correct.
for the young riders to make mistakes.
Yep.
You learn much quicker when you make a mistake and you have to fix it. And the horse does the same. And I think nowadays, in the modern way of doing it, everyone is having training, cross-country training on artificial surfaces, on replica fences that they have at 90 centimeters, and then 100 centimeters, the same profile, the same ground, nothing changes, just the height of the fence. For me, this isn't learning. That's a gimmick, I think. But people have learned to make a living from coaching. They can't afford to have their customers making a heap of mistakes because they don't come back the next week. This is, I think, not helping the sport of cross-country riding.
I couldn't agree more. I would also add, Andrew, that as I travel and I teach people in all different countries. And Diarm, you said 75%. I would say there are probably sort of 85% of our sport probably compete at a meter or lower. And those are the people that think and listen to or think about and listen to what they read, what they hear from the top guys, and try and do that. But actually, they nor their horses are capable of reproducing those thought processes or those reactions. And so actually what they're doing is a misinterpretation or a misunderstanding of what the sport is. We could go back and say we should all go hunting and we all will learn from sort of falling in ditches and but those 2 days have passed. But what we need to do is keep saying to horses and riders at a lower level, look, guys, understand the simple things. You follow a line, you manage the pace, and it's two minds getting from A to B. And when you follow a line, you do a dressage test, but you also then have to jump a corner fence by following a line. It's the same line. And you also have to manage pace. You do walk, trot, and canter in a dressage test, but you have to manage a pace going cross country, whether it's a big gallop or a small gallop. And you manage the pace and you teach people, or you create the situation that people learn how to manage the pace, how to manage the line. And ultimately, the horse needs to understand that if you don't arrive at a perfect spot, it makes a plan to get us out of the hole. And it makes the plan because it knows it has that freedom and understanding that it's their job to do that. And the novice rider, the amateur rider, the 80, 90 meter rider, they need to believe that making mistakes is not wrong. Making mistakes, they didn't get it wrong. They didn't get what they wanted, but the horse looked at it and said, it's okay, it's fine, I've sorted it. And they need to enjoy the process of developing that partnership and making things more fun and more understanding that that's how life is at that level. It's only when you get to a higher level that the issues of being very accurate become a bit more critical. But then you hope that the top 10%, 15, 20% of people competing at that stage are developing those skills. But the 80% that enjoy the sport as the amateur lower levels, they don't need as much education as they get.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, guys. And when I moved to the UK as a younger rider in my 20s when I left college,
you're not that old.
Sure, yeah, no, I know, only spring chicken, really. A couple of years ago.
I remember you in shorts.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're not that old either, Eric. We won't get into those numbers. But the incentive, I suppose, was that you get to go and compete against the best in the world. And I suppose one of the you don't get too many opportunities to watch eventing all the time. When badminton's on and things like that, it's great. But one of the things I'd always make sure I watched, mainly out of entertainment, was I'd go through the novice entries and look at what Andrew Nicholson was riding in the novice classes, because he generally, in the spring before badminton, would be competing 5-year-old horses around novices, and there was inevitably, like, there were a few there. I saw a couple of mistakes for sure, but what I'm learning from this is that it was, you practice what you preach. It's really interesting. It's like I've heard a lot of top coaches in other sports talking about the comfort zone and learning, and that's a little bit about putting yourself into a zone where you will make mistakes, because then you'll learn from it. And it was interesting that was obviously your strategy. It wasn't just, I think the interpretation that a lot of people would take from that is that Andrew's a genius and he's able to compete his 5-year-olds at that level.
When really I just had no comfort zone.
Well,
no, I didn't understand what the word meant.
But will you talk us through, it's kind of a little bit so that we can indulge it in the story of it, but Avebury was a horse that, watching him in his early years and then listening to some of your interviews after his, some of his best cross country rounds when he won Burghley, I just remember so many little comments about you were so kind of strategic as to how you would compete him and how you would ask him even throughout his course, what pace you'd start at, and but talk us through the Avebury journey a little bit, Andrew, because there's a hell of a lot of horsemanship in that, and it's an interesting one.
Okay, well, so first I bred Avebury. I broke him in when he was 3. I sold him when he was 4. He was very easy to do everything to straight away. He could jump, he could move, but he also could be quite cheeky, but in a nice way. I sold him, he went off doing show jumping for 2 years. The person who brought him rang to say he had reached his level in the show jumping. They wanted to sell him as an event horse, but half a dozen riders had looked at him and said he was too common. So we brought him back for my wife Wiggy to ride. She evented him for one season doing novice with him. And I used to just watch him. I never rode him. I just used to watch her jumping him and doing flat work on him. And she won a few novice events with him. She went off with the children somewhere for a few days. I took him up the gallop to see if he could gallop. And he could gallop very well. I then rang Rosemary Barlow and said, buy Wiggy's horse for me to ride.
And you're still married.
I was going to say, what did Wiggy say? Was she in on this plan, or was it a...
Yes, she was in on the idea. She didn't know I'd taken them up the gallops, because I knew she wouldn't like me taking them up the gallops the speed I wanted to go at. So I didn't tell her that, but she knew he was... I think she had upgraded him to intermediate. She didn't really want to do intermediate, and she knew he would be valuable to sell. So it was better sold to one of my owners. I can ride it, and he's still here. And that's what we did. And pretty much as soon as I took over, Avebury got more clever. I think with Wiggy, he was in his little comfort zone with her, and they did their partnership superbly. With me, he was quite cheeky. I think the very first event I had a run out, and yet he does it, the whole thing, easily. And that's pretty much what he did in his whole career. If I didn't ride him like I'd stolen him, he would.
Which you actually did from your wife.
Yes. took me a while to get the hang of it, and I can still not understand how he could go around Burley so easy, feeling like he's only going at half speed up and down the hills around Burley, and me knowing that I've got to go quietly at the beginning. When the jumps are easy, when the jumps are difficult, I've got to start speeding up on them, putting them under pressure. Then I'll go quieter for the easier bits. And he could make it feel like it was just a schooling session. And he wasn't very big. He was quite chunky. And for me, Burley is the hardest terrain for horses to gallop over. And I cannot work out how he can manage to do that so easily.
No, it was. I think it was incredible because it's so easy for a lot of people to look back and just focus on the fact that he won 3 Burleys. And
it wasn't a case of beating him up and being mean to him. It was a case when I knew the difficult fences were coming, I would just put a bit more speed in, and his self-preservation would then help me. A little like Eric saying, 2 minds are better than 1. When was going quietly was the times he used to run out. So he was still going fast enough to go inside the time, but in his mind, he could look who's in the crowd. Oops, I've got him here, and dive out. Whereas when I put that little bit more speed in, he would stay locked onto the fences like I was shocking him into concentrating.
Well, that's called horsemanship. That's why I've got Andrew doing this.
It's partnership, isn't it? Yeah, that's
It is. It's understanding the horse.
Yeah.
Can I?
Whereas jockeys don't have the luxury. This is why I'm looking forward to doing, with Pal. They don't have the luxury of doing the training with the horses. They've got to get into their minds very quickly.
Can I ask about that? So at the forum, you will be doing your presentation alongside Robbie Power, who's a jockey who's won the Grand National. He's won the Cheltenham Gold Cup. He comes from a family of very, very good horsemen and women. Sister Izib is a very, very good 5-star eventer for Ireland. Father Con was an international show jumper. So the horsemanship is very much running through his veins. How does that link in? Because Andrew, you, if I'm right in saying, actually, when you came over to the UK at about 18, you were riding racehorses. So how is that link between the racehorses and eventing and horsemanship?
It's like I said in the beginning, a horse is a horse. They got 4 legs, ears, and a tail. That they pretty much all think along the same lines. Some have more ability than others. And a lot of the national hunt racing is connected with the eventing. The Robbie Powell, I think, did a lot of very big show jumping before he became a jockey. And for sure I rode it. And I rode in the Hickstead Eventers class against him not so long ago. So he can turn his hand to anything, and most of those top jump jockeys can do that.
If I could interject there, one of the reasons I wanted to put Andrew with someone is because it's not that Andrew can't do it; he can do it very well. But for me, it adds an extra spice to the conversation and the session when you have 2 people as if they were chatting over a drink about their life with horses, their experience.
Eric, you told me that was going to be chatting over a drink.
Well, it is. That's halfway, Andrew. That's halfway. Did I not tell you that?
I thought it was all drink.
No. That's afterwards.
Okay.
Robbie's one of those guys that I've known since a 14-year-old when he won something which I ran in Ireland called the Golden Saddle Scheme, and I've a number of little interesting stories which I'll tell on the day at Robbie's expense about that. But it was remarkable watching him as a 14-year-old, actually not really understanding anything about what he was doing, but doing what he was doing brilliantly. And he really couldn't explain what he was doing or why he was doing it, but he was able to sit on any pony or horse and run down to a fence with remarkable feel, remarkable touch, remarkable sort of understanding of what the horse needed, the right pace, the right sort of speed, the right input from him for the horse to jump very, very well. And he has done exactly the same in all his racing career. When you watch him, he sits on different horses and does it very well. And although Andrew won't really have a chance to chat much to Robbie about this, when they do get a chance, it'll be interesting how they manage that sort of session in the forum. But I think what you will see is many of the words that they both use and many of the qualities that they both talk about being synonymous with this word horsemanship. And that again is part of the reason that I picked him as with the other members of the day's forum, because they have that understanding.
I think it's going to be very special. I think it's a huge achievement, Eric, and of course,
Diarm, you haven't talked about barrel racing yet.
There's Nicole, let's do the full schedule. 3rd of Feb.
Can we go on? This is what is happening. It's at Hartbury College on Monday, the 3rd of February. And this is what the full schedule is. So Andrew and Robbie Power will be doing a session in the afternoon, but there's loads more going on throughout the day, including barrel racing. Dee, go on, give us the full schedule.
Well, you've got the barrel racing and you've got dressage. Is it Adam Kemp who's with you, Eric?
Correct.
William Micklem is there, I believe. And
yep, William is doing something only at the end of a session that I felt was very relevant to today's sport. The thoroughbred has gone in and out of fashion within our sport, and I think most people who have had any longevity in the sport really understand that our sport is based on, if not the thoroughbred, 7/8 thoroughbred, 3/4 thoroughbred, that the thoroughbred, that extra sort of bit of stamina, that extra bit of sort of life, quick thinking, whatever, is important. And many of the horses that are in our sport come off the racetrack. So I felt it was a relevant subject to bring someone who I know well from the British Thoroughbred Training Centre at Lancaster to come in, and she trains horses off the track and they go into the sport. So let's see what they do, because on a different side of that, coaching and teaching around the world, I see the same thoroughbred off the track in a horrendous way, because they get cast out of the racing industry and they are not suitable for anything other than the bullet. And some of them need very specialist retraining, but they are the most wonderful horses when you can find that calmer key, that settled key, and give them a nice retraining existence. So I thought it was relevant to our sport to talk about that, to expose that, to do that.
We need to bring we need to keep speed in the sport for that reason. I think it's really really important. I think if I can drop one statistical element into it, last year every 5-star in the world was run on good ground. Kentucky, Badminton, Lemoulin, Burley, Poe, Adelaide, they were all run on good ground, and we had the lowest clear inside the time rate that we've had. Now, some of that is to do with course design, and the likes of Eric Winter, very clever at slowing people down. But an awful lot is that, as the other big statistical trend in the sport is that dressage marks have been dropping, and dressage has been improving at a phenomenal rate, but a lot of this is because of the type of the horse. And when the steeplechase came out, that requirement to gallop at over 600 meters per minute for a serious amount of time, then allowed us to go for horses that were a bit more designed for power and a little bit more designed for dressage. But I think we've gone too far, and I think now the 5 stars are showing us that people have gone a little bit too far in the type of horse, and we need to bring that thoroughbred blood back.
Correct, and that's what I felt, and I think it was important that we highlight what wonderful horses they are, but how not that easy horses. You need to understand them, but they are great to work with. The barrel racing and the dressage, again, dressage is very important. Adam last year, who was very, very good, and I brought him back because he was so good, gave a very sort of down-to-earth demo on pure dressage. It was great. But something I did 18 months ago, two years ago, when I was teaching in Washington State in America, I was asked, would I like to go meet the world champion barrel racer? I said, sure, lovely. And I went and had a lesson with her. I had spent a couple of hours with her, and I rode her horses, and I rode her world champion barrel racing horse, and she taught me. And the words, the language, the way she talked was just delightful, because it was using the words and thought process of a real horsewoman. And I thought, what a lovely girl this is. What a really nice attitude. Now, would it not be lovely to try and link proper horsemanship with nice dressage and get two people talking about how there is so much more in common than there is difference between those two sports? And so Nicole, Ackley, and Adam are going to sort of focus on that with a barrel racing horse, with a dressage horse. They're going to sort of play around. And I think that'll be a very interesting session, because two articulate, interesting people, both very highly sort of motivated, both high achievers. So I think that'll be a fun session. And then I have an orthopedic surgeon and a martial arts expert trying to sort of, the orthopedic surgeon saying, I see an awful lot of broken bones from...
Which one's which, Andrew?
Which one's which? I was going to say which one.
We'll decide on the day.
Andrew's definitely the martial arts expert. I think it's interesting, because a surgeon sees the same injuries. Well, there must be sort of some logic. Can we make that better? So I think that's just an interesting little sort of thing. So it's a very balanced. It's a very varied program.
Yeah, I think
there's
actually
so much going on. I mean,
sorry, go on, Nicole.
I was just going to say that's basically it's how to fall in a safer way, which nobody wants to fall off. But if you're going to do it, to know how to do it, if you can, could be a massive help to safety and to making sure that you don't injure yourself and that your horse is safe. And actually, it's hugely important. So it's a varied program throughout the day. There's loads going on. What were you going to pop in before I ask Andrew and Eric one last thing?
I think actually when you go through the whole program and when you listen to the last 40 minutes or so on the discussions and the keywords that are coming out, I think one of the coolest bits, and particularly putting Andrew and Robbie together, I think what's going to be your biggest challenge is actually how intangible and big it is, and how relatable all of the individual stories. When you think of the words like respect, feel, understanding, instinct, how much of this is things which all of those words in themselves could be the theme, when actually you've got two and more than two, when you've got 4 or 5 different, top riders from different disciplines, all talking about those concepts. I think actually your head will go home full of ideas and stories from them. I think that's why we'll be there, Eric. You'll be with me, Nicole.
I will.
And some of our listeners will be there who win tickets through this. So yeah, really looking forward to it, Eric. I think you and Jean, Dora, and Sue. I think it's going to be a brilliant one. I'm really looking forward to it.
Good.
It will be a fantastic event. It's always very much one of those sort of early season calendar events that gets put in, and you know that when it's the IEF, the eventing season is just around the corner. Before we go, Eric, Andrew, I've just got a quick question for you both. Who is, just to put you on the spot, the greatest horseman or horsewoman that immediately springs to mind? Eric, I'll start with you. I mean, there's a man on this podcast, Eric. Just
No, you can't.
I
You
know.
can't.
Don't pick Sam.
That's a very obvious one. I think there are so many interesting ones throughout the generations. I think in his prime, you would start sort of saying the Eddie Mackens of the world that just kept producing remarkable jumping results. What is it, 3 or 4 Hickstead derbies, and those are guys that have longevity and on many different horses. And I think there are lots. One of the things that I did sort of mention in the book was three New Zealand riders that I was just amazed with in my eventing career of their natural feel and talent. And that's TNT, Todd Nicholson and Tate. When those three were in their absolute prime, you could just watch them ride anything day in, day out, and it just made it look very easy. So you couldn't sort of help but mention those three.
Andrew, how about you?
Very good. God, there's so many, isn't there?
Oh, no.
Okay, one, the shock your John Frankham. When I first came to England, was working in the racing stable, Frankham was on the way up to be the main jump jockey. Then I started watching him as the number one jump jockey. I went to Blenheim. I think it was the first year of Blenheim. And I'd met John Frankham a couple of times racing. He was at Blenheim on the Wednesday. I said, "What are you doing here?" He was riding a horse around the cross-country course with a camera on, giving a commentary. And was unbelievable. Unbelievable. A jump jockey doing that. And a couple of years ago at Olympia, I was involved with the jump jockeys show jumping round. Frankham was one of the riders. The same again. Very, very talented horseman.
Yeah. I agree.
Very talented.
Agree. Dee, have you got a person that stands out for you?
The person on the pod who has never even sat on a horse. I think.
Oh, yeah.
Good man.
Yeah,
You talk a good
That's
talk.
what it's all about. That's what it's all about.
Thank you. I mean, in terms of learning, when I first started out, I was always, and I still am, asking questions all the time of all of the people that we're lucky enough to interview and meet, and trying to understand horses and eventing and the sport. And as I say, someone who didn't grow up with horses or who can't ride at all. And
Don't
the
say
person,
John Wayne.
John Wayne. But actually, quite like, I mean, she has lived quite like John Wayne. But I would say the person who gave the most indecipherable answer, and who I think fits this for me, is actually probably Lucinda, who always told me, like, I just can't explain that to you. Like, there isn't an answer to that. You just know. So Lucinda, 6 badminton wins on 6 different horses. And for her, Eric, you mentioned longevity. I think Lucinda Green is probably one of the people who's always stood out for me in terms of talking about horses and her understanding of them. Sam,
just to throw yours into the mix.
Yeah, I mentioned him earlier, Paul Carberry. I think I thought he rode so many different horses. With just a bit like Andrew on Avebury, thinking the whole time about what would work. Archibald was one of the interesting ones. That was a horse who you could only put his nose in front in the last 5 centimeters of the race. So in order to do that and time that, was pretty incredible to watch that. But then, for the flip side was that he could win from, as I say, at the back of the telly as well. And of someone that I've ridden, quite close to and seeing them in action, and someone who I just sort of thought, how is he doing that, would probably be Shane Breen, so an Irish show jumper as well. And actually both of those guys, Shane and Paul, you will see them on the hunting fields in Ireland every winter still, hours and hours still to this day. That it's a huge part of their life. So there's probably no coincidence there.
There's such a huge variety. I think I'm just going to throw mine in. Actually, it kind of straddles back into racing again, because a few of them have come from there, and that would be AP McCoy, a 20-time champion jockey. To 20 consecutive seasons, he was the best. And to have nearly 4,500 winners in that kind of sport that is so dangerous, I just think is absolutely extraordinary. Every type of horse, even horses that perhaps shouldn't have won, he just somehow, with great horsemanship, managed to make it happen and got them on side. It's been an absolute pleasure. This is such a brilliant way to start 2020. I'm thoroughly looking forward to the International Eventing Forum. 3rd of February. If you haven't got your tickets, then look out for a competition that will be coming on the Eventing Podcast page very soon. Eric, thank you. And we'll look forward to seeing you in February. It's been a pleasure. Andrew, thank you as well. And we'll hope to get you on the podcast again in the future.
Thank you very much, and I'm still none the wiser what I'm doing.
Don't worry, we'll talk just before you go in, Andrew. It's okay.
Over a few drinks.
We'll be fine. Natural feel. All you need to know. Diarm, Sam, thank you very much. And listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this insight into horsemanship. We'd love to know what you take from that word, because we've already discussed how absolutely vast it is. We would love to hear your thoughts as well. So get in touch. Tag us at Eventing Podcast. Find us on Facebook, social media, all of the usual channels. And we will be back very soon with another episode of the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. This podcast is available for free on iTunes, Spotify, Podcast Addict, or wherever you usually listen to your podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. Find us at eventingpodcast.com or search Eventing Podcast on social media.